And joining us now is Amanda Edwards, a Democrat in the race for United States Senate. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on.
So right now you're an at-large city council member from Houston.
Yes.
If somebody from Amarillo or El Paso says, okay, you know Houston well, but what are you going to do for the whole state in general? What would you say?
Great question. I think this race has to be about all of the people of Texas. And so that's why we're taking great strides to move across the state, small markets, mid-sized markets, larger markets as well, but listening to what residents across the state of Texas really are concerned about, and then most importantly, focus on coming up with results and solutions that can address those challenges and opportunities.
So what are some of those issues that are statewide and not just a Houston issue?
Absolutely. People are concerned about access to health care coverage. When I say access to health care coverage, I'm talking about that both insurance and making sure that the premiums are going down, things of that nature, but also they're concerned about prescription drug costs. We've been talking to people. We even just did an interview in Lubbock of a woman who was rationing her prescription drugs as a result of the high costs of prescription drugs in our country. And so looking at ways in which we can have policy in place that actually makes a difference in people's lives. Economic opportunity is another big issue. Gun violence, issues relating also to higher ed and education as a whole.
So one, I think a lot of people point to a problem with Texas and healthcare is just there's so many people who don't have insurance. I mean, a couple million. Why is that issue important to you? And then how do you fix it?
That's a great question. When I was growing up, at about the age of 10, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And although my dad did pass away when I was about 17 years old, along his journey, I asked a lot of questions that led me to understand what our healthcare system really feels like and looks like. And so I'd ask my dad questions about whether he was going to have access to coverage on his experimental treatments that he was receiving. And knowing at the end of the day, when I was asking the questions, what happens if they don't pay for this? And my dad would say things like, well, we'll have to try to figure it out. Ultimately, the question becomes, well, what happens if somebody can't figure it out? Those are life and death outcomes for our families. And having someone in office who appreciates the urgency of those issues, but then also has strong and good ideas about how to go about solving that access to coverage question. People not only need to have access to health care coverage, but they need to have adequate coverage. There are millions of people who face being underinsured, meaning they think they have enough insurance and they've been paying their premiums, but then realize upon needing treatment that in fact they don't have enough insurance. We've got to close that gap as well. We've got to drive those premium costs down, and we need to make sure also that people who don't have employer-based insurance can have an affordable public option that they can take advantage of as well.
So you're a fan of the public option. If you win and you get a vote on this, your public option, Medicare for all, that's the other option?
Not Medicare for all, but rather having a fix to the Affordable Care Act that allows you the option. So you can either have an affordable public option or employer-based coverage as it currently stands today. I know one big thing that happened when the Affordable Care Act got passed is that some people were very worried or concerned about losing their choices with respect to their doctors. We want to preserve and listen to the things that people complained about and then actually proffer solutions to some of those challenges.
You bring up higher education. Most people, I would imagine, in this state go to kind of one of their local community college or a state-run institution. What would you support from a federal standpoint that could help the cost of college? Because it seems to be up at face value somewhat of a state issue.
Yeah, it's a situation in which you're facing people who are now going to college, community college, four-year institutions, you name it. They're being burdened with so much debt that they're paying the price of a mortgage before they've even gone into an open house. We've got to be serious from a policy standpoint on how we can reduce that or at least keep keep those costs contained. And so one way in which the federal government can get involved is whether it's a private institution or a public institution, all of them accept federal grant dollars. Well, along with those federal grant dollars, we can have that be accompanied with a set of measures that require our academic institutions to slow the rate of growth of their tuition costs. That's one way to have some controls put into place so that it doesn't continue to grow and grow and grow at such fast and high rates.
And with the increase in grants, I mean, there are a lot of people in Texas that would want to use these. How would you suggest paying for that if there was the new money from
Oh,
DC?
and when I refer to the grants, I mean in terms of academic institutions, they get federal grant dollars for research and things of that nature. So instead of in attaching to those federal research dollars or grant dollars, you'd say to them, you've got to keep your costs under control rather than it being something directly to a student.
So not new money, but the
Correct.
current money, more requirements.
Exactly.
Okay.
There you go.
When we talk immigration is a big issue here in Texas. I would imagine you're against the wall.
We cannot continue to put resources and billions of dollars into a political campaign promise. We've got to be serious about comprehensive immigration reform. We've got to be serious about people being treated with decency and respect at our borders. We can't continue to allow or perpetuate this scenario where children are being separated from their parents and being put in conditions that are not appropriate or just. We have to make sure that we go beyond this moment, however, and obviously fix that, but then look at how do we codify into law what our comprehensive immigration reform ought to look like. Part of the issue here is that you are seeing the president basically create immigration policy by executive order. And what we need to have is a set of laws that actually work and have a system where the waits and the lines that people have to wait in order to legally migrate or come to our country are appropriate, but then also find out what we are going to do in an appropriate way to address the concerns that people have who are here, who may not be here legally, making sure we have pathways that they can become citizens. I think these are ways in which we can deal with the issue of immigration, among many others. Certainly, the way we have been handling asylum issues at our borders, I think, is inconsistent with our American values. And we've got to now stop treating our borders and our immigration policy as just pure politics and really think about, in a meaningful way, how to have a long-term shift in the way that we handle immigration in a manner that actually works for all of us.
So if you're confronted with an comprehensive immigration reform in the Senate, what would it have to get you to support it?
We've got to have pathways to citizenship for the people that are here. I mean, certainly I am not someone who says or recommends that we need to only not have ICE because we don't have any justifiable reason, because there are things like human trafficking that we need to account for and use ICE to address. There are issues relating to violence and heavy drug trafficking that obviously would necessitate that. But looking at our families doing things against people who are simply trying to contribute to society, I don't think is the way that we need to go. We also need to look at some of the policies surrounding how we're actually creating the flow of immigrants into our country. I think some people have been waiting for decades and decades to enter the country legally. And so figuring out a better process by which we're going to have immigration take place in our country is a necessity. And of course, we have not made meaningful change in quite some time in that regard.
When it comes to the economy, President Trump and his administration, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but pretty much government get out of the way, let businesses do what they do, and they will worry about hiring people and creating jobs like that. Do you have similar views, or what would you do instead when it comes to getting people jobs or getting people better jobs, I guess?
Yes, I believe in stimulating the economy by providing people more access to more opportunity. And so we can do that in a multiplicity of ways. When we look at, for example, manufacturing or manufacturing and thinking about what happens when the machinery at any type of manufacturing context, when that changes, does that mean an automatic pink slip? Why not have portable workforce development training that you can have, that you can take those credits and then allow you to have that upward mobility within the industry that you exist in? Or looking at the issue of providing jobs or opportunity in places where, like rural communities, where there may have been job loss or closures of buildings or manufacturing centers, looking at ways in which we can incentivize sustainable wage-paying jobs to locate there that also have benefits. Part of what is a challenge also in Texas is that we become #1 for rural hospital closures. So not only is that an issue of access to health care, but that also becomes an issue of access to employment, because a lot of our healthcare centers and facilities employ a lot of the people in the community who reside there. And so we've got to look at ways in which we can provide people in those communities with jobs that are sustainable wage-paying jobs, but more importantly, that also have the benefits that people need to keep their families growing and vital.
The argument against, economic incentives is somewhat of the government picking winners and losers. You just don't. I think that doesn't catch water with you?
Yeah, I think when we talk about economic incentives, you're talking about it from the realm of incentivizing the behaviors you want to see. It's not enough just to go into a rural community and tell people that their jobs are going to come back to them because you're going to build a big, beautiful wall on the border. That's been the rhetoric. That's more scapegoatism. Well, we have to step away from that and actually be serious about policy solutions and talking to people in those communities about how we can address, say, for example, what we call the future of work, which is how the economy is changing due to automation, due to innovation. For the consumer, the concept of seeing innovation in terms of the delivery of a package on the same day is exciting. But for someone who works in a factory or works in a context where their job will then go away as a result, isn't so excited about that. So how do we make every Texan not only feel like they're part of today's economy, but also truly become a part of today's economy as well as tomorrow's? And that's the question we ought to be answering as policymakers who have vision and an ability to execute upon that vision.
And then just real quick on speed round here, just because some current events, we're talking about impeaching President Trump or not, you would...
I mean, it's obvious with the facts that have been revealed through the proceedings that we have to continue on this path. I'm not saying that with excitement. I'm just saying that in terms of we have to uphold the law. And when you have an abuse of office in this sense, that cannot be something that we tolerate in this country.
So that sounds like a yes, you would. And then presidential candidates, have you made up your mind on which one you're going to support?
Now, I can't tell you that.
I have to ask.
But I will say, I think it is important, and I think it is something that we haven't seen on display in this way, to have such a broad spectrum of candidates running and people to choose from. Now, certainly we've got to get to a point where there is a candidate that emerges from the pack, but we've not gotten to that stage and we've not gotten to that point. So I am anxious and looking forward to seeing us come together and unite. What I don't want to see is that be a process in which we're divided. I think it needs to be one in which we unify ultimately at the end of this process.
And then your race for United States Senate is pretty crowded.
Yes.
Why, out of all the choices that a voter could have, why you at the end?
Well, I'm the best candidate and uniquely positioned to unseat John Cornyn. And I think John Cornyn has not acted in a manner that is consistent with the interests or needs of Texans. We need somebody in office who will be consistent with those needs, but also who will be effective at the job. It's not enough for us to just give campaign promises and underdeliver. It's high time that the people of Texas have a leader who not only have vision and focus, but who can be effective in office. And I will be well positioned to build the necessary coalitions in order to do so. Getting folks who are in the middle, who are independent voters, who are concerned about the state of our nation to come on board Team Amanda, but also galvanizing more of the base. When I talk about that, I mean communities of color, people under the age of 35. We saw in the 18 cycle that they registered in high numbers, but didn't come back out to vote in as high of numbers as what was anticipated. We've got to have someone who can fill that gap and address both the building of those coalitions so that we have the person who can actually unseat John Cornyn as the nominee.
All right, Council Member Amanda Edwards, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.